Setting up a roving hideaway proved to be somewhat easy to do, if only for the reason that you could bring it home every night and didn't have to sneak food and supplies into it. Nonetheless, it is a time-consuming job to find the right kind of vehicle, equip it with just the right kind of empty boxes and other junk, and get it ready for filming. The whole process required several days during the month of November 1962. Photographer George Brolin was to be confined this time in 2 large cardboard boxes, carefully tailored to accommodate him, his camera, and a dozen other pieces of equipment. His assistant throughout this entire operation was a special undercover agent of the State Beverage Department who spent several weeks in Jacksonville developing contacts with moonshine retailers and who drove the truck on days when filming was done. The camera would be shooting from a hole in the box on the left-hand side of the truck. Several alterations were necessary to solve the problem of the shiny lens of the camera, which at first could be seen from the outside. First, an old tire was strapped to the side to provide some concealment, and when this didn't solve things completely, a shiny new piece of window screen was slipped over the hole, and the lens was then effectively concealed. A special transformer was installed so that power from the truck's battery could be used to operate the electric motors of the camera. An additional dimension of sound was experimented with, and the agent was supplied with a tiny portable radio transmitter which he strapped to his waist. With a microphone around his neck and a small antenna running down his leg, he transmitted a signal which was picked up by a receiver on the truck and transferred to the film camera. Thus equipped, the truck and its occupants began a tour of active bumper joints scattered throughout Jacksonville and Duval County. Tonight, you will look in on a few of them. This is a shine house on North Street, operated by a man known as No Legs. The agent shows here how the customers get in, down between the houses and around to the rear door of the house on the left. In this particular operation, one of the busiest in town, the customers never go inside the house. They deal instead through a hole in the screen door on the back with a crippled man who sits just inside the door. His is strictly a takeout service, and he sells only in bottles, although some of the customers consume the liquor in the backyard. When the agent made his buy on this visit, he saw about 40 bottles of moonshine on the floor next to No Legs. No Legs freely admitted to the agent on one occasion that he is a veteran of almost 20 years in the moonshine business and was quite generous with advice on how the agent could go about getting into the business himself. On another occasion, No Legs told the agent in a lengthy interview which was being recorded that he pays considerable money to certain city policemen who in turn do not molest his operation. Over the years, he has been in court, of course, but he has very little concern about this peril. He says that juries and judges are quick to have pity on a cripple. This touches on the most prevalent attitude of the public about moonshiners, which is that they are harmless, petty violators who prey on no one, cause no damage, and are not deserving of harsh punishment when caught. Operators like No Legs laugh openly at such naive beliefs. In just a moment now, the agent will be coming out of the house, back down the pathway, and you'll be able to see him show you the bottle he has just bought inside. The price for a half pint of moonshine whiskey in most places in the Jacksonville area averages from 50 to 75 cents. Here's the agent now. There's his bottle. Next, a brief but interesting sequence involving a retailer named Charlie at 501 Dewdrop Street. The agent has just made a buy of a half pint of whiskey, and Charlie can be seen reaching into his hiding place to get another one. The operation going on in the house on the left here illustrates clearly the persistent nature of the moonshine trade and shows how polite slaps on the wrist by the courts do little to discourage peddlers. This is a bumper joint on DeWitt Street operated by George Barrett, the same man whose thriving operation on State Street was observed by us in early 1962 and whose operation was raided twice in one weekend. At the time this film was made, considerable illegal activity was underway in the back rooms of the house. Barrett himself was in the back, along with 4 or 5 customers and a huge pot on a table containing an estimated 3 gallons of shine. Barrett's fine resulting from his 2 arrests in early 1962 was a mere $100, a sum he could dip out of a week's receipts from his moonshine operation and hardly cause a ripple. This is a perfect example of how arrests, hearings, trials, and the like are often nothing more than nuisance factors to these operators. The penalties imposed too seldom act as deterrents because they are almost never harsh enough. This caller at the front door would have certainly been astonished had he known what was going on in the back rooms of the house. The men who operate these places, like Barrett, are often kingpins in their community, men of some status. It is an open secret that they are among the wealthiest people in the group, and they tend to accumulate a certain amount of power and influence which spreads the sour taint of this vice even farther. Many forms of gambling, for example, are directly linked to these moonshine outlets. Here's the agent again now, with a fresh half-pint of whiskey tucked into the pocket of his coat. This is a bumper joint which seemed to have a good-sized clientele. This is 804 Minnie Street, a place bustling with activity every time we parked our truck across the street to film it. On this particular occasion, there were 10 or 12 customers inside, with about 4 gallons of whiskey in a huge pot. About half the customers this time were women. Some of them had their children with them. It is worth noting that while the sale and consumption of moonshine primarily involves Negroes, a sizable part of the Negro community will have nothing to do with it. The moonshine racket is by no means limited to Negroes either. The State Beverage Department has estimated that white people consume about 15% of the illegal whiskey sold, and in activities like wholesaling and transportation, considerably more than half the people involved are white. Many of the ringleaders who bankroll and manage huge illegal distillery operations pose as upstanding white businessmen. Not once in all the several days on which this kind of filming took place did anyone suspect that a camera was grinding away in the inconspicuous truck parked across the street. Why people buy moonshine is a complex question, but the business would surely evaporate without people willing to pay for illegal whiskey. Part of the answer is that these people apparently like the additional belt or bump they think they get from white lightning. Another factor is cost, which in the absence of taxes almost always runs lower than legal whiskey. Another is the easy availability. Still another must be simple habit, since the manufacture and consumption of moonshine has gone on for generations with a traditional disregard for what the law has to say about paying taxes. One of the simplest answers is ignorance, ignorance of what moonshine does to health. This is a shop-worn theme, hammered out over and over again, but with very little effect. Drinkers of moonshine whiskey either don't know or don't care about the danger of lead poisoning, or the fact that bloated rats, dead chickens, snakes, and other animals which might be diseased often fall into fermenting vats out in the woods. If the real toll on health could be measured, it probably would be something staggering. On these visits, the agent stayed inside anywhere from 2 minutes to as much as 5. In a moment, he'll reappear in the door, and here he comes now with a fresh bottle he's putting into his pocket. When you watch how outwardly casual these places are and consider that almost 1/3 of all the whiskey consumed in the state is moonshine, you begin to be a little awed at how successful this racket has become, and without the benefit of any advertising whatever. This is a bumper joint we visited several times. It's on Caroline Lane near the expressway and is operated by 2 females known as Mary and Little Mama. When the agent went in to make a buy, he saw a box on a table just behind this big wooden screen you can see out front, a box containing about 60 bottles of whiskey. This place did such good, brisk business, they kept a fresh supply of other bottles concealed in the bushes nearby. The bottles used by retailers are often filthy. On one occasion, at another bumper joint, the undercover agent picked up a bottle of shine which had some rusty scale in it and remarked to the man selling it that somebody could get killed on that kind of stuff. The operator shrugged and replied that he didn't care. He just wanted to get rid of it. These films have provided only a glimpse of a few active bumper joints in the Jacksonville area. We could have spent weeks, of course, shooting film of the front of dozens more, but no useful purpose would have been served. This may be even more revealing. There are 20 bottles of illegal moonshine whiskey in this group. Each one was bought from a different place by an undercover agent of the State Beverage Department. All of them were bought within a 3-week period. Each bottle represents an illegal whiskey operation of one magnitude or another. But these 20 by no means represent all the places in operation. The Beverage Department estimates that in December 1962, more than 91 retail outlets were operating in Duval County. Roughly half of these were inside the city limits. The other half were in the county area. One of these bottles has an unusual background. The way it was sold shows the clever methods retailers will employ to skirt the law. This half pint was bought from a man called Buddy at 1520 Johnson Street. Johnson Street lies directly alongside the North-South Expressway. The wire fence marks the boundary of expressway property. Buddy's house is just across the road from the fence, about 4 houses up from the corner. Watch now what happens when the agent arrives.
I got $1. Everything better? How's everything? Yeah, where's everybody that's going? Going? Yeah, out it out. They want to be associated. They don't want to He didn't tell them what to do with you today. No, they hired my street. No, they ain't gonna hire. They won't hire us alone. No, they hired us about 3 or 4 o'clock. That's right. And then you see them. Friday. Yeah, they're hired. Okay, buddy.
The whiskey bottles are concealed in thick grass across the street from Buddy's place. This way, if beverage agents happen to drop in and discover the bottles, Buddy can disclaim any knowledge of them. This kind of thing, of course, makes it extremely difficult to prove possession in a courtroom.
See what she said.
And just as the agent walks away from the house, a truck has driven up with another customer whose order is about to be filled. Less than a block away at 1540 Johnson Street is this house, the home of Lucia White, a real veteran of the moonshine game. Drivers along the expressway, if they knew where to look, could spot a cluster of cars near Lucia's place at frequent intervals during the day. This house was until recently one of the most elaborately rigged shine houses in existence. A high wall with a door in it stands in a pathway between this house and the one on the right. It keeps prying eyes from looking in. Just on the other side of this wall, which is made of tin, is a side window of the house, out of which beverage agents say moonshine has been sold for years. Quite aware of the need to keep raiding lawmen outside long enough to dump whatever whiskey may be on hand, Lucia rigged her house as a small fortress. This was the front door of the house, confiscated by the beverage department in a raid 5 months ago. The door weighs over 100 pounds, is made of 3 layers of wood. It has 4 hinges, 4 latches, and 2 steel crossbars. A small opening across the front has steel grillwork in it. The back door was about the same, 3 inches thick, over 100 pounds in weight. It, too, had a series of hinges, latches, and crossbars. The windows of the house were protected by heavy steel grillwork like this.
On November the 15th, 1962, an undercover agent of the State Beverage Department bought this half pint of illegal whiskey from Lucia White, evidence that she was still in business. She has been in and out of business since 1943. A check of the available records shows she's been arrested more than 40 times, and the great bulk of these occasions involved moonshine violations. She has been convicted more than 24 times in municipal court and in criminal court. Her record is littered with what amount to petty penalties, fines ranging from $25 to $100. On one occasion, she paid a $300 fine. On another, $200. These, in our opinion, are ridiculous penalties for a chronic offender who has a record 2 pages and 19 years long and has shown utter disregard for the law. In view of the profits in the moonshine industry, fines of this kind are absurd. The penalty for committing a felony in violating state beverage laws can be up to $5,000 or 5 years in prison or both. At no time in this woman's long moonshine history has a penalty of any severity been imposed. It's difficult, of course, to convict an offender of a felony, since possession of a gallon or more of illegal whiskey must be proved. On the other hand, state law says that a person with any prior conviction of violating beverage laws who is subsequently convicted of any beverage violation, even a misdemeanor, shall be deemed guilty of having committed a felony. Now, let's look at the record. On June 2nd, 1961, for example, Lucia White was arrested for possession of moonshine. She was convicted in criminal court and sentenced to pay $50 in fine or spend 30 days in the county jail. According to the law, she was guilty of a felony, and a full weight of state retribution could have been applied, but it was not, and it seldom is. One local judge who is in general disagreement with the degree of penalties meted out to convicted moonshiners has made the appropriate observation in saying, when the penalty is not great and the hope for reward is high, the penalty is a farce. Several things work against a stiffer brand of justice for moonshine offenders, and possibly the biggest is the heavily crowded docket of criminal court. It's easy to see how judges and juries are tempted to look with nonchalance on a string of violators hauled into court with a pint or quart of illegal whiskey, when the court stay is crowded with murders, robberies, and other more serious crimes. The moonshiners, on the other hand, take full advantage of this situation to perpetuate themselves in a racket which is disturbed only by an occasional fine or a few weeks in jail. You have seen tonight how difficult it is to obtain sizable amounts of evidence. Now, a man taken to court with 2 quarts of moonshine could be selling many gallons of the stuff over a short period of time. It seems clear to us that a few really stiff penalties, especially for chronic offenders, would make the trade a great deal more perilous than it is now. This continual underestimation of the moonshiner is one of the keys to the fact that he operates a relatively safe, flourishing business in Duval County. Listen to Duval County Solicitor Edward Booth.
I think many people tend to view moonshine whiskey as an opportunity for the poor man, so to speak, to obtain a drink. But in my judgment, it's not that at all. It's a type of organized vice, and with its huge profits, it's a constant threat to good law enforcement because of the ultimate corruption that it can lead to.
Do you think this vice is organized in Duval County?
Oh, I think so. I think in years past we've had prostitution, we've had narcotics, we've had lotteries, which we still have today, and moonshine. I know that narcotics and prostitution, that type of vice, is at probably the lowest ebb that it's ever been in this county and in this city. But we still have moonshine whiskey and gambling on an organized basis.
What happened to this man illustrates how vicious the game can be played when moonshine is involved. This film was made last summer in Duval Medical Center.
Who was Joe?
Joe is a fellow Fed, I imagine.
He works for the Federals, you mean?
Works for the Federal.
And they thought you had something to do with it?
They said I know who he was. That's right. They said I know who he was, and they called me on the telephone. They said he'd been trying to call me at home, and I feel like I wasn't home, but I was home. I answered the phone.
And you told them you didn't know anything about this federal agent, is that right?
That's right.
And what did they do then?
They said, dip his hand. He ain't gonna tell it.
Dip your hand?
Dip your hand. He
What
ain't
did they
gonna
do?
tell it. And they dipped his hand. They said, you ain't gonna talk none. I was in pain then.
They dipped your hands in the solution?
Yeah, in that solution. And you know what it was? It was hot, and it smelled kind of like milk. And they murmured and talked a little bit to one another, and this and that. And so he had to come back again. He said, dash it in his face. I said, get his eyes. I said, know what I'm saying, that. I said, get his eyes. And that time I threw my hand up.
And they threw the solution in your face?
Right.
And it burned pretty badly, did it?
Yes, sir. All the skin. 3rd degree.
Has it marred your face up pretty badly?
Yes, it is. You can't see my skin at all. It's other skin. Yes.
And you didn't even know what they were talking about?
No, sir. I didn't know what they was talking about.
If the complete story of violence and even murder associated with the moonshine racket could be known, it would be a somber tale. The most sensational case in recent years involved the murder of Circuit Judge and his wife, the Chillingworths, because the judge was bearing down too hard on moonshiners and gamblers. Ineffective penalties are only part of the story on Duval County's moonshine problem. County Solicitor Booth provides another clue.
Do you have any indication that information on moonshine raids has been leaked following the issuance of search warrants by any of the justices of the peace in Duval County?
Yes, I've seen indications of such in the past, and in order to avert that possibility, it has always been my policy to request that these search warrants be issued through the Circuit Court of Duval County.
Now, if these leaks have existed or do exist, does this not imply a connection between these individuals and the moonshine operators themselves?
I think if anyone connected with an investigation over the issuance of a search warrant leaks the information to the place where the search warrant is to be served, that the connection is rather obvious. There is some reason for the person leaking that information, and as I say, I think the answer is obvious.
5 days ago, on Friday, December the 28th, a sizable raid on bumper joints in the Jacksonville and Duval County was triggered, with more than 40 state beverage agents and Duval County Sheriff deputies assembling at Dinsmore for the assault. Armed with search and arrest warrants, they made unannounced calls on suspected moonshine operators. 13 persons were arrested for possession of illegal whiskey, a large number of others for vagrancies. There were other arrests made on Sunday. Included in the raids were a number of the bumper joints you've seen on this program tonight. With at least 90 bumper joints operating in Duval County, it's an understatement to say that this vice is flourishing. It's also true that vice on any large scale cannot exist without the knowledge of law enforcement agencies. At least half of the outlets appear to be located outside the city limits and thus fall under the jurisdiction of the sheriff. While the sheriff's department is unmistakably in need of additional manpower, there are indications that the existing force could be doing more to diminish moonshine sales. This especially applies to the man on the beat, who can almost surely become aware of many of the existing outlets. If the individual patrolman is too busy with other duties, then we must face the fact that law enforcement in the county area is selective and not complete. Enforcement is, of course, also a responsibility of the State Beverage Department. But according to officials of that agency, most of the manpower of that department is necessarily concentrated on the larger pipelines, such as raw material, sales, manufacture, and distribution of moonshine. In the city, a different set of problems exist. Here there appears to be no shortage of manpower. Although the city does make a goodly number of arrests for beverage violations, the fact that so many bumper joints still exist is indication that not enough arrests are being made. It's significant that no city police officers participated in the raids last Friday evening, and they are bypassed on most such ventures. The State Beverage Department refuses to discuss it, but the implication remains that a leak of information might result if city officers were used. There are recurring indications that to an unknown degree, moonshine operators are paying protection money to at least a few city police officers. This is a difficult matter to prove, but this opinion is held by a considerable number of responsible individuals who are close enough to the situation to make an intelligent judgment. To the extent that this is true, we have corruption. And corruption is the worst form of cancer with which a community can be afflicted. This undermining of law enforcement itself is the most serious offshoot of the moonshine racket, which so many people amazingly regard as petty and of no consequence. Our motive is not and never has been to malign law enforcement agencies, nor are we prosecutors who necessarily have evidence to take into a courtroom. We believe it's the duty of an information medium to call attention to conditions it has a reasonable basis to believe exist. Even with ideal law enforcement and heavy penalties, moonshine will never be eradicated. Like any vice, it can survive on a sneak basis and can often defy detection. What we should strive for, however, is a condition in which the business is not wide open and casual. And if it takes manpower or money to accomplish this, we should not hesitate to provide it. We will get only what we want. If we want to see moonshine flourish, we should quit calling it a vice. If we want to see it minimized, we have to demand it. We are on the threshold of becoming a big and important city. Our problem of the moonshine racket and its associated ills is still within our means to cope with. As a vice, it has no place in the present or future of a great metropolitan area.